Welcome to The Impossible, where we empower others to face the impossible, inspire them to be impossible, and motivate them to do the impossible. I'm Matt, and we are back this week with, I believe, our third time returning guest today, a guy we've known for a long time, and we're very excited to chat with again today. You guys have heard him earlier in the podcast, twice now, and he's got an incredible perspective on a lot of the things that we like to discuss on the show. And particularly, he's got this perspective due to his own personal studies, but also his studies as a student of philosophy, which the last two times you guys have heard from him, he was a student studying for his master's degree, which he has now completely defended and completed. And now he has a master's degree in philosophy. And he's taken his own personal spin on that to become what many refer to as the cowboy philosopher. And I really like that kind of spin on it because, you know, in the world where we hear so many people trying to chase a certain direction when it comes to philosophy, I really like this man's perspective in the sense that it kind of breaks it down. It makes it a lot more attainable to people like me, certainly. And it also makes it a lot more, gives it some utility, gives a lot of this high level thought. How do we take this and put this into our daily lives and our daily actions? And how can we get good pieces with which we can implement today and move forward? So hoping to get a lot of good conversation today for you guys. Get a lot of those actionable items and really dive into how this man's journey has changed over it's probably been almost a year now since you've been back on, but we've got Mr. Logan Reynolds in the studio today, and we're excited to hear from him, not just in his journeys in the last year and completing his master's degree, but specifically some more recent journeys he's had where he's actually got to meet one of his greater heroes in his life and the man that got him into philosophy originally, and had some cool first full circle moments, but I'll let him tell that story. So we're excited to have Mr. Logan Reynolds back on the podcast. Thank you for being here, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah.
It's good to be back. Yeah, it probably has been over a year.
It's crazy to think, but
yeah,
it's wild how fast time can go. But I know last time you were in here, we'd spent a good deal talking about parenting and fatherhood specifically. And I know at that point in time, we hadn't had Lily yet. So it was all a bunch of things I was trying to anticipate.
Yeah.
And now I've gotten almost a year's long journey crash course seminar in how to be a father. And it's,
that first year is wild. It's
the greatest adventure I've ever been on, man. It's so cool. I've never had something that is just so, it can be so demanding, and it can push you to your limits, like your absolute limits in like the best way possible. Mm-hmm. And I already have a propensity for it and love things that do that in the first place. But your capacity to love, your capacity to grow, your capacity to think outside of your own worldview. I think so many of those things are completely just shocked when you have a child, and it's an amazing thing to get to experience, and it's an amazing thing to get to grow in. But it's been an incredible journey, and one that I think that should you choose to approach it in this manner, everybody has sort of a limitless potential for growth in that area. And so it's been a really cool experience for me. And I know you with both of your girls has really been a big impact on your life. What's it been like for them, or I guess for you, to be able to demonstrate to them throughout this whole process of earning this master's degree and going on to, chase all the things you've chased, both musically and in other professional areas of your life? What's it been like to be able to show them and demonstrate to them, what you can make happen in your own life and help them kind of see that own potential for their own life?
I don't know. I don't know that I've ever thought of it that way.
Yeah.
It'd be good if what I've done did that, and I hope maybe in some sense it has. I think the flip side of it is I was gone a lot. For 2 years I was in Athens all day, and at one point in time when I was busking a lot, it was a big part of how I made my money between that and the TA position that I had. So I was in Athens all day, 5 days a week. I played music from 9 or 10 o'clock at night until 2, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, Friday nights and Saturday nights for 2 years. So I don't know what they got out of that. I don't know what a 6 or 7 year old girl picks up on out of that. I always kind of hope that, I don't know what I think I just did it. And maybe I don't know. It kept things afloat for a while. That's good. I'm glad for that. I'm happy for it for my own sake, but I think there has been some positivity in it, and that I see them being interested in some of the things that I'm interested in at kind of the 6 and 8 year old levels.
Mm-hmm.
Different things. I've talked about we sing together in the truck a lot, and they both love to go out in the yard and hit golf balls with me. Even though the clubs are as long as they are, they like to do that. That's how we'll spend a good chunk of this summer, off and on. I took them into a bookstore the other day to pick up a gift for my mom, and they were like a couple of kids in a candy store, and we've been we read together almost every night. Well, I read to them. We're just about to finish The Hobbit, and it's been good to see. Maybe that's it. At the higher levels, I don't think any of them. I don't think they're at that stage of their life where they're starting to think about whether they want to be like me on a sort of high resolution level. But we have these moments where, well, my kids like books and they like movies or music. They like movies too. And so I'm seeing glimmers of kind of the early phases of some of the ways that I've gone and some of the things that I've done crop up. And yeah, I think that's about the best answer that I can. I don't know that I've ever really thought about what impact, positive or otherwise, the effort that I've put into that might have had on them. Never occurred to me.
Yeah. Well, the thing I've noticed, and granted, our daughter's just now approaching a year old, so I've got a long way to go as in terms of seeing how they can grow and develop and shift in all those areas. But the number one thing I've seen is it never ceases to amaze me how she just seems to catch every little thing. Like already, she'll find things on the floor that I would have had no idea were there in a million years. Just the little pieces of plastic or trash or whatever it is, or if there's a bowl on the table, each and every content of that bowl is explored and figured out. Her attention to detail and her capacity for it just absolutely blows my mind. And I think kids are actually a little bit unique in that sense, in that their minds have not been so filled that there's a lot they're missing out on. Yet I'll notice in my own mind there's quite a bit of things that I miss on a day-to-day basis, particularly in the somewhat permanent sleep deprived state that we've been in the past year, because Lily is a wonderful baby, but she does not sleep, not very much anyway. Which is, totally fine. She's a very happy and healthy baby, and some babies just don't sleep as much as others, and that's just the nature of it. But you know what? Here's what I always think of, because I spend a lot of time trying to think about how is everything I'm doing impacting and influencing her. And I think so much about that because that's just what our direction has been in the last several years is, how can we help spread this message and this mission and this mindset as far as we possibly can, and complete that vision that we have for what we're doing here. Because we know, Austin and I both know where we've been in our lives, some of the lowest points we've been in, and we know that this helped us. And we know if it has the capacity to do that, it has the capacity to help other people. And we actually believe that it has the capacity to help anyone who wants to chase it. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about how do I help instill these things that I always needed so badly in her. And I don't care what she goes on to chase in her life, what she ends up loving, what she ends up choosing to want in life. None of that matters to me. But I do want her to be able to feel like she can chase anything in life. And now that's something that's pretty incredibly rare these days. Do you have the ability to feel like you can chase something? I think that, at least I always felt this way a lot growing up. I think our society does this really good job of putting limits on people. Like, you can't be this, you can't do this, you can't chase that. Like, in your example, for somebody for a child, most children out there today, to tell their parents, like, I want to go out and be a singer and make music, and I want that to be my life and my career and my passion and everything. Especially when we were coming up, that was not something that was acceptable to most people, because, even if it's coming from a good spot, you hear that a lot where it's like, oh, you can't do that. You can't be successful doing that. You got to go to college and you got to get a job and you got to, do X, Y, Z. You got to fit into this nice little kind of perfect slot. And I just don't think that actually works for most people. This idea that you've got to fit into this perfect slot, or you've got to sacrifice what your dreams, what you really dream of and what you really want to do, you got to sacrifice so that you can get something more, quote unquote, stable or whatever it may be. And I think the thing that I would want to instill in my daughter more than anything else would be for her to be able to give herself permission to chase her own dreams. And I think what you've been able to do the last several years is you've been able to show your girls, I've got these passions, I've got these dreams, and I'm going to be brave enough to go out and chase them, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I'll put everything I have into them, and everything I'm able to put into them, and we'll see what we can make happen, and at least along the way, you learn and you grow and you build skill and you build passion, and you, I think, generate quite a bit of, or at least I would speculate, you generate quite a bit of happiness for yourself in being able to pursue those dreams, being able to chase those dreams. And so even if, they don't, whether they do or not grow up to have music as one of their main passions in life or whatever it may be, at least they've been able to see you. They've been able to see a clear example of someone who's willing to go out and chase that dream, pursue that passion to whatever end that may be, and know that it's okay to do that. So I think that will help them understand that it's okay for them to do that in their own lives.
Yeah. I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. I think because it's hard to leave them sometimes. It's hard to go out and chase these other things, and I don't know about your experience, but I know for me, we talked about it last week with our guest last week. Sometimes you get a good amount of like guilt build up when you're not there, or when you're pursuing other things, or when you're focused on other things. And I think sometimes, it all comes back to how can you help teach them with it? How can you help guide them with it? At the end of the day, is it something you're doing purely for your own self and your own interests and your own desires, or is it something you're doing to help build and guide and grow them and create a life for them and for your family? Sometimes you have to make those short-term sacrifices for long-term gain. And what we spent a lot of time last week talking about was finding that good balance point between all of your priorities, whichever they may be. And if you're a father, your family is going to be on that priority list. And, Tim brought up some great examples about how one thing he talked a lot about was whatever moment you're in, whether you're with your girls or whether you're with, whether you're performing on stage or whether you're writing your next book or essay or whatever it may be. He kind of talked about how you want whatever it is you're doing at that moment, you want to make that your main focus. For this hour, I'm going to work on writing, and that's going to be my absolute main focus. And then I'm going to be with my kids. And then for that hour, that will be my main focus and what I'm putting everything into. And just trying to partition that energy as much as possible to allow it to be maximized during the time that you're using it. And that was something that was pretty impactful for me and everything, I'm trying to balance right now. But do you have a strategy like that for what you're doing right now? Or do you just kind of going after it?
Just kind of going with it, know. I've never been, and this is not my most positive trait. I've never been much good at planning.
Okay.
Except in times of crisis. It's a weird thing. I say this cautiously and hope it's not too far out of alignment with the truth. I am, for some strange reason, excellent in a crisis. And sometimes less than reliable in the day-to-day. And I don't know why that is. Not to say that, I still go to work, I do this, I do that, But as far as planning out how my day is going to go, I don't know. I know I'm going to wake up and I'm going to go to work and I'm going to pick up the kids and, whatever happens in the interim happens in the interim. And there's kind of a nice, flexibility with that. And I think a large part of it is how I'm wired. And I don't necessarily say that as an excuse, just so much as an explanation. When I took my Understand Myself test, I came in at around 96th, 97th percentile in trade openness and abysmally low in trait conscientiousness, especially industriousness.
What are those things?
So that's part of the Big Five personality model. That's the model of personality that Jordan Peterson studied, and it was his test that I took for it. And so there are 5 main personality areas, and then they each divvy up. So there's openness. See if I'm going to have a hard time remembering. Openness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, so tendency toward negative emotion, extroversion, and agreeableness. And so those all break down into, for example, agreeableness breaks down into politeness and compassion. Politeness being not necessarily whether or not you're rude to people, but whether or not you're willing to adjust your responses to the necessary demands of the social situation. And then compassion is, the degree to which you care for others. And so what's kind of interesting about that, on that one specifically, I'm, pretty low in politeness, meaning I'm not necessarily rude to people, but I have a tendency to say what I think.
Yeah.
But I'm very high in compassion, especially, so there are, people may not necessarily want to believe this, but the data seems to indicate that there are sex-based tendencies. Men and women tend to, as a trend, fall into different camps on these traits. Now, you get some overlap, but the pattern is there. For a man in general, I am unusually high in compassion, but I'm pretty darn low in politeness. So that creates this interesting tension in the fact that I actually care quite a bit about people. I also think what I think and need to say what I think. And sometimes, depending on which one gets the upper hand, the other suffers. Openness is openness to ideas, and I think it's openness to experience and interest in ideas, I think is how it divvies up. Conscientiousness is industriousness, and cleanliness is its two subcategories. And so my industriousness, it's not that I can't work. It's just that I need to care about what I'm working on for me to put much into it. I am not a hyper disciplined kind of person. And that's, I would say probably to the extent that I've taken it, that's a detriment to me, more than likely. But, and then cleanliness is what it is. And actually, it's interesting. I generally tend to keep a kind of messy space, but not a dirty space. So you won't find much trash. You might find things scattered everywhere, but I know the system, and it's not dirty. It's just not particularly organized. And so anyway, going back to the parenting end of it, they've kind of grown up with a stepdad who's interested in literally everything. I mean, so I think mine in particular I can't remember if it was my overall openness score that was like 96th, 97th percentile, or if it was one of the subcategories. I don't remember. But in my own personal experience, I'm interested in practically everything. Which tends to make me, it can make me a bit scattered. There's no telling really what new interesting thing's going to come up that I'm going to want to get up to my eyeballs in for a week. And then you couple that with particularly low industriousness, and you wind up with this, and I'm not blaming my wiring for it. I think it's a positive and a negative, and there are things that I could do to work with it more than likely. But you wind up with a personality that tends to be a bit dysregulated, but also attempts to be very fun. I mean, I think fun is not the only thing, but one of the roles that I've kind of tried to take on as a dad is I play with my kids a lot. And I don't know why that seems so important to me. It just is. Maybe it's because it's one of the things. I mean, I get some enjoyment out of it too, and we seem to bond over it, and it makes them happy, and that makes me happy. And I always make sure they get their homework done. I make sure they're in bed. But of the two of us, I am the parent in the room that will say, we can stay up another 20 minutes. It'll be okay. It's not going to hurt. And, no one's going to die if we go to bed 20 minutes late tonight. And then I wind up reaping the consequences of that when I have to get the very schedule dependent children out of bed the next morning. Or Tay does, and then I have to hear about it from her, and with good reason, because I put her in that situation. So I don't know exactly how we got down this rabbit hole, but it's something I couldn't help but thinking about when you were talking about making sure that they knew they can chase their dreams. I think that's right. But as a man who has more dreams than he needs, I hope some element of me dies with me. Some element of it. I hope there's some part of them or, my future kids that they get enough of me that they're interested in the world and they have things that they want to chase after. But I hope for their sake it's a fairly finite amount and they get enough discipline to actually catch one of the damn things.
Just knowing what to chase.
Yeah. And actually having the will to chase it.
Yeah.
Long term. I'm a great sprinter. I learned how to bind a book in a week. I'm terrible at... I wouldn't say terrible. I have to really love the thing for it to be a long, protracted journey with it.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the lesson, is not just being passionate, but knowing truly like what you are truly passionate about. Because I would say I have a tendency toward that as well. I could get very very fiery and passionate about things for a short time, and then it would die off and not stick, not hold. And so it took me a considerably long time to actually figure out what are the select few things that I would do for the rest of my life. Like if I just had a totally open life, like no responsibilities, no priorities, no nothing, what would I do with my time? And, the thing that's really seemed to stick is not even necessarily easy to quantify or define, but it's this, it's what we're trying to do with this show, I suppose. But it's this idea that you can continually create new versions of yourself, continually be in the process of building this person that maybe could not or should not have otherwise existed. And this person will be capable of doing things you never could have dreamed of in your own life.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of little sub-passions that trickle off of that, like lifting, like speaking, like writing, these other little side passions that trickle off of that. But really at the core of it, that's what it is for me. Like and so all these things I do are just outlets for that particular thing. Now that's a pretty up in the air, undefinable thing, but that's what it is for me. And so things like I've fortunately been able to carve a lot of the extra out, because I used to be in many different camps. Like I actually I love business, so I owned a lawn care landscaping business for a time, and I was trying to do the podcast, and I was trying to run marathons, and I was trying to powerlift, and I was doing and because I found all of these different areas of which I could express that passion. And so I had to narrow it down to the select few of which I get the most personal satisfaction out of and the most net positivity in that particular area of passion and what we're trying to chase. But I don't think it's a bad thing to experiment either with these different passions, and particularly when you're young and have the freedom to do so, because I think you almost have to go through a bit of a process of trial and error to really figure out what sticks. And I would say that certainly some things have stuck for you, in the sense that you were able to go on and complete a master's degree.
Yeah.
That doesn't come without some level of industriousness, I would venture to guess.
That's, well, it comes with some amount.
Yeah.
There's definitely, there's no faking your way through that. Or at least not the one I went through. There's no faking your way through that. Now, the real work for me probably mostly came with the thesis. I am guilty of one of the cardinal sins of all gifted people, which is that within my domain, I can make up for a certain lack of hard work with what I got gifted with. And that's just the way it is. Not necessarily proud of it, but, and it's not just the gift. I loved it. I lived and breathed it 5 days a week. I was always thinking about it, and I was thinking about it a lot before then. So maybe it depends on what you call work, because maybe you don't need to grind away every night if it's bouncing around in your head all day, every day, and it never really leaves. But I think that's a big part of what made that such a good experience for me was I got to spend 2 years doing what I love to do in an organized fashion and getting, some professional credibility out of it, some connections, some furthered education, a job. I mean, I was a TA, so I got paid to do it. And, that was, I'd have been, I in another life, I think I could have been very happy. I've speculated either as a monk or as an academic, a hardcore, but I say that, and sometimes and the academics don't always see eye to eye, but as far as just what we were doing for 2 years, I taught Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I took classes Tuesday, Thursday, and I was in Athens all the time. I was playing music on Friday and Saturday nights. And, for 2 years, I basically made a living with philosophy and music. And that was great. Now, I loved it. I loved every second of it. And maybe I'm being a bit self-denigrating. Maybe I put in the work and it didn't feel like work because I was having a ball most of the time. I don't know. But I loved it. And now the real work, even what I would consider work, came with the thesis. That was a process. Not in a negative way, just it changed a lot from, the first iteration of it to what actually wound up going into the thesis and dissertation database, what actually got accepted and published. There was a long road between those two, and a lot of fine-tooth comb editing and formatting, and that also, when it was done, very rewarding, because I would say probably my most professionally rigorous piece of work that I've done, as far as, it's a defended thesis. It's, I think it's fairly well researched, although a lot of its original ideas are fairly original ideas that I've kind of distilled out of years of thinking about these sort of things. That was the funny thing, was my thesis was born out of an idea that I had during a class that I took spring semester first year. So by the time, I've been thinking on it, really, it was either spring or fall semester. I'd been thinking about it basically not that long into the program, clear through the end, by the time it was all said and done.
Well, we were talking about it, I think, on your very first podcast with us, which would have been September, October time of 2023.
Yeah.
So over a year and a half ago now.
Yeah.
You were talking about it, and it wasn't necessarily a new thought even at that point. Like, it was something you've been thinking on, sitting on for a minute. And I remember it really sparked some interest with us, and we spent a good chunk of time talking about it on your second episode. So it's been several years now that this has been in the works.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's my most important idea. I don't know if I'm right about it, or maybe even if I'm not. If I'm right about it, probably nothing I ever think up will matter as much as this one. No,
that's a pretty powerful way to feel.
Well, it's a weird way. I mean, here's the thing. The good news is I'm interested in ideas for ideas' sake, so I'm never bored. It's not like I've landed my white whale. Now what am I going to do with my life? Because here's the thing. The caveat to having an idea like that is you feel a kind of strange responsibility to it. You feel like you owe it something, and you do. I'm still figuring out how owning that responsibility looks.
Yeah.
Hopefully I've made some inroads or some progress in fulfilling that. But the other thing about it is it's got all these branches that come off of it, because you start applying it to, so maybe for anybody that doesn't know what I'm talking about, my thesis was a general theory of causation, and strictly speaking, I was trying to explain metaphysically, what do we mean when we say things cause other things to happen, and what that process actually might look like in some abstract sense. And the conclusion I eventually came to is that something like causal laws have to exist. At least it looks that way. There has to be, and I drew a lot in this, eventually links up. It doesn't even link up. It's meant to be the same as the logos in philosophy, the ordering structure of reality. And I became convinced and remain convinced that without that, anything like an ordered, clearly discernible reality would seem to be impossible. You need some ordering structure, system of rules. Here's a funny thing. I came to the realization you can break it down into similarity and difference. And difference is real. Like, what does that mean? Well, it's part of this cable is blue and part of it is black. Well, blue and black are different things. Well, everything is slightly different. Well, then you come to this zoomed out, abstracted, strange idea that difference as such exists. Anyway, the idea being that an ordering structure is absolutely necessary to any sort of ordered reality, anything that we would actually recognize as a reality. And then you start applying that. I became convinced and remain convinced that it strikes me as likely that the logos to which John refers in John 1:1, the Greek is enarche ein hologos. In the beginning was, it gets translated as word, and actually I think that's okay. Not that King James needs my approval anymore. I think that's okay, and we can talk about why.
You'll allow it.
But in arche ein hologos, kai hologos ein proston theon, kai theos ein hologos. If you allow logos to be its own word for a moment, and you translate it as in the beginning was the logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was with God, and the God was the Word. If you translate the Greek somewhat literally, or God was the Logos. That's the kicker. That's what I'm trying to get across here. I'm bouncing between languages. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And I let myself play with that idea for a minute and became convinced that it's right. That, especially since it's got this clear callback to Genesis 1 with the in the beginning. There's this clear callback to that. And in the bigger version of the thesis, which I hope to eventually expand out maybe into something like a book, I examined this. We've talked about this a little bit, I think, already, so I won't hash it out too much more. But if you look at the actions of... I had this thought the other day. I was talking to my mother about these ideas. And I had the following thought, and I like it quite a bit. God is that which does what God is said to do. And what I mean by that is, forget about your physical or mental imaginations of whatever his physical, whatever the entity might look like. Look at what God does, and then pay attention to whatever it is which would do those things. And in the creation of the universe, God divides heaven from earth, light from dark, land from sea, animals from plants, each according to their own kinds. He is the delineator. He is the orderer. He is the line which allows sameness and difference to exist. And so I played with that idea, and I became convinced of the idea that the Logos that John is referring to in John 1 is the same as the Logos that we know in part from philosophy, or at least the Logos as I know it from philosophy. And so I say all that to say I've had this idea that I'm convinced is quite important. It's not over. One, because I feel a responsibility to it, but also when you start interpreting the rest of the text within that framework, wild, illuminating stuff starts to crop up. And it's like this fountain that never quite runs out of water. There's always, I'll think about something that I've thought about a dozen times, and there'll be some weird quirk in it that'll come unlocked one day that I didn't know was there. And it never quite runs out of ways to astound me. So it's like this may be the most important initial beginning of an idea that I've ever had, but it's certainly not over. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just such an incredible place to be. And that's where that's largely what we have felt with our own mission and vision here. And I love how you phrased that. This is the most important idea I will ever have. Because I don't think, at least in Western culture, we tend to give that much credence to ideas. Yet, I certainly think they can and they should. Because I think we become a very action-based culture. Mm. No action begins without an idea first. Mm-hmm. Facebook would not be Facebook if Mark Zuckerberg had not had an idea or a vision of what it could be. Now that's much different from like something what you're discussing here. But I think at the end of the day, they're the same in that they started as an idea. Mm. They started as an idea that grew to a vision, and eventually you can adopt action to it or couple action with it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that, because Now, how an idea like what I just said becomes actionable isn't immediately clear, but the idea I just laid out, if it's right, is maybe an idea that man has subconsciously known for a very, very, very long time. The ideas that I'm working with right now, I'm convinced they tie into what Nietzsche was talking about with the death of God, who unchained the earth from the sun. And these ideas, we'll get in trouble for saying this. This is the antidote to... No, it's not even the antidote. This is one side of the culture war. This, and I think you can understand what is going on with the more fanatical ends of leftism, and I stress the more fanatical ends, through understanding first that perhaps subconsciously a belief in God and a belief in reality were really close to the same thing. And when I say reality, I mean a hard, concrete, somewhat immovable, except under its own terms, reality. Same as I'm sitting in this chair, and it is a chair, and we don't need to see. That's the overextension, that's the error that postmodernism, or I'd say American leftism, but quickly it's Western leftism. It's undergone this belief that they rebelled against the confines that order placed on them, but they went too far and began to believe that there were no confines at all. That's why I think you're probably pretty hard pressed to find any real hardcore. I think you'd be hard pressed to find any real hardcore leftists that would practice a monotheistic religion, particularly Christianity or maybe even Judaism, in any way like we might recognize it. Because I don't think that you can hold those two ideas in your head at the same time. That you can do and be anything you want, that there are no biological constraints on whatever it is that we call gender, that there are no biological tendencies, that there are no patterns, that there are no... Well, that's the thing. There are no patterns. At its core, it is this kind of rootless, homeless, chaotic mindset that thinks in ultimate freedom they will find some meaning. And I mean ultimate freedom, which is an interesting distinction, because a lot of the founders, or at least it was an idea, and I would have to go back and find this, but it was an old American idea that freedom meant freedom to follow God. Now that's a very different thing than freedom to do whatever it is you wish. Now we can talk about what it means to follow God. I think it's reasonable, if you still have one of these in your head and you hear that little voice, the still small voice that clues you into things that you should do or shouldn't do, or to follow whatever it is you're spiritual and worldly path is, if you've consulted that side of yourself or that side of reality, however you want to think about it, you have some idea of what it means to know whether you're called to do something or pretty distinctly called not to do something. And that's a whole different idea from, well, you can do and be anything you want, especially if you're a confused individual who doesn't know what you want. And so part of the reason that I think the set of ideas that I've been working on is so important is I've offered a 10%, maybe even 25% secularized entryway into religious thinking. And understanding, I have tried to appropriately make conscious the unconscious elements of religion. And I would say out of love and admiration for them. And I would say out of, however faltering, my own attempts to abide by them. There are a lot of people that get religious ideas on an intuitive level, but perhaps the reason that so often such articulate, I would say very conscious, very cerebral people struggle with the ideas is that these were ideas. It's like asking a literalist what it means that, I don't know, what's a great literature example? How much sense does Romeo and Juliet make if you just take it literally? Or any great play, or any great work of art, or any great piece of music. There's a certain level at which what's really, really on the surface is kind of not quite there. That's not quite the
it's
point.
Not even really the point in most cases.
Right. It's not.
It's just a means for, it's an outlet for the point. It's a mean for expressing the point.
And especially when you imagine, how well is everything that I just said going to be transferred over 30,000 years?
Probably not.
Right.
Well,
but if you say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, that can stick for not 30,000 years, although certainly parts of it were born out of, oral traditions that, predate the formalization, but still, here we are, and that's out of the Old Testament, so, the Jewish predecessors to Christianity would have known that story just the same as we know it now. They may have, I'm sure they had their interpretations and different, things like that. But as far as what the text said, that has stuck. And a lot of very intellectual, very smart people miss the necessity for the art and the storytelling and the ability to transmit that information over long periods of time. Nobody, save for the very scientifically minded, can even come close. I doubt there's many people at all who could recite anything Einstein ever wrote for you or I. But you know what almost everybody knows?
E equals MC squared.
E equals MC squared. You can package intense amounts of information into one phrase if you do it right. And that's what poets and songwriters and storytellers and artists visually, that's what the artistic minds get right, is they can pack all of that into something that can later be unpacked. But you can't ship all of that in unpacked form and have it just doesn't have the same staying power. I don't know why. It just doesn't. So all of that to say, I hope that maybe some of the ideas that I've been working with can shed some good light on and I would say I haven't been responsible for this, but I will say portions of society appear to be waking up to something approaching the need for the fulfillment of the religious instinct. I think portions of society are beginning to get that. And I'm not trying to sway anybody necessarily towards one thing or the other, except I would say, obviously, I have my inclinations toward, I think Christianity is right. But the main thing I think in a lot of ways is to open up a somewhat secular door into this beautiful non-secular landscape, this beautiful religious, spiritual, metaphysical landscape, and then also to be able to bring it back over to this side and say, fellas, let's remember something. There is such a thing as a concrete reality. We can start there. Because I think that's where the war is being fought. I think that's where the war is being fought, is whether there is a reality or whether there isn't. It's because if you look at it's partially over whether there is a reality or whether there isn't, and it's partially what prompts someone to either want to alter reality or contend that there isn't one, or contend that if there is one, that it's rigged. And I would say that's resentment. And that's the other side of the coin. There's a metaphysical side, and there's an ethical and moral side to this war. And they're the black evil twins of our darkest impulses, which is, taken from, Cain of the Cain and Abel story, or the resentment that Nietzsche wrote about, or the slave morality that Nietzsche wrote about. They're all kind of talking about the same thing. This impulse to, when we fail to blame others, or blame reality, or blame God, and then to upend that system. And those two they're very tightly linked, and I think that's where the war is being fought. Now, the battlefronts are education, politics, transgenderism, the assortment of it. They want you to think that we're fighting over whether or not, actually, I would say personally, even as a right-leaning centrist, I will tell you, my personal predilections towards freedom incline me to say, if you're an adult and you've made this decision, then you can do with yourself what you please. I'm actually not that interested in controlling your life. I'm really not. But anyway, they want you to think that it's about immigration or LGBTQIA plus issues or religion. It's closer to being about religion, but it's even deeper than that. All of these various fronts for the supposed culture war, they're the fronts, but they're not the generals. And so I think that's part of why I hope maybe that's some place that this work can eventually lead into, is there's elements of it that go that way, and there's also just elements of it that'll help you understand life better, I think. But it's been framed in, I'm explaining causal laws to you through mathematics as an example, through logic as an example, through analogy and stories as an example. Examples, trying to eventually make it so that the non-religiously inclined, or perhaps the fence sitters, have a door to go through and can get to this place where the reality of it opens up to them. It goes, oh, the laws of reality exist. And what does that mean? And if you go back and interpret the text through that lens, then I think suddenly things become clear in a way that might be really useful to people who aren't getting that sort of introduction from traditional religious sources. Sorry, I get a little fired up.
No,
about these sorts of
I
things.
love it. One thing we love on this show is well, as we talk about a lot, is passion. And a bridge that we try to create is for people to understand these various passions and understand their own passions. Because passion is really one of the core central things that helped get Austin and I moving in the correct direction for us in life, and helped us get to a much better spot where we're not just helping ourselves, pulling ourselves out of a dark spot, but helping pull others out of darker spots and get them on a path that is gratifying and passionate and driving toward them or for them. And so we love whenever somebody gets passionate on our show, because that shows that you're tapping into that thing that's gonna drive you in a direction to help you, or basically drive you in a direction to help you have impact, have meaning, have purpose, whatever those words may be for you. Not just for yourself, but for those around you, and to whatever extent you want to drive that or take that. That's true for all of the guests we have on this show. And what's cool about it is that we have guests that have such a wide range and array of passion and vision, and to your point, I would say understanding of their own reality. And that's what I think is so interesting about it, because I would agree with you. I think reality is a lot, our understanding of reality is a lot closer for everyone out there than we would maybe allow ourselves to think initially, or it's a lot closer to exact than maybe what we're being told it is. And what's really interesting to me is hearing everything you discussed there. You see that you see a lot of those themes pop up from in many different avenues. So I know you talk a lot about your thesis and your views, and a lot of the things, or a lot of this idea, you talk about it through the lens of Christianity. What was really interesting to me is, as you were discussing that, so in college I ended up taking 3 years, 6 semesters of Asian philosophy. I actually got just a couple classes away from a minor without ever meaning to or intending to by any means. The reason I took all of that was simply because it was so fascinating to me, and I loved it. Particularly, I loved the professor and how he presented and guided and conducted that class, or that set of classes. I only needed one because I went to I guess what would be traditionally known as a liberal arts college. And so, they require that you take classes in all of these different disciplines to help kind of round out your education as much as possible. For most people, they're just kind of, and honestly, for me at the time, sometimes those classes are nuisances, in the sense that, like, this is not what I'm here to study. Why do I have to take these other classes? Well, I didn't understand it at the time, but I knew that I ended up taking this Asian philosophy class because it was the last thing available for me to be able to get my religion credit that I had to have. So I take it, and I absolutely love it. And he's talking about ethics and logic and all of these other, philosophy and all of these other completely obscure things that I had no previous exposure to in my life. I ended up loving it so much I kept taking more classes for 3 years straight. And what's fascinating about that to me is what you described there, a lot of what you described there, as far as reality and how there is reality. There are objects that are clearly defined and have been clearly defined for tens of thousands of years now, maybe even longer. You also mentioned the space between those things, in the sense that you talk about logos, and you talk about God, and how God is those things. He is that reality. But that reality is also him.
He's the precondition for it.
Yeah, yeah. And there was a point in there where you also talked about him being the space between those things. And that's what struck me, because in Asian philosophy, particularly Hinduism, and I apologize if I don't get this 100% correctly, because it has been quite some time, but Hinduism has the concept of Brahman, which is God for them. But it's different than how we visualize God in the West here. We view God as like if we have this, kind of particularly more Catholic approach, you've got the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. For Hinduism, they've got many gods, many deities that all represent these different things. But then Brahman is something entirely, I don't want to say above, but distinct from all of that. And I would say there is hierarchy to it, how they view it. Brahman is...
We can talk about that here in a second. I've got an idea on that.
Yeah. So Brahman is they've created this like figurehead visualization, this like white bearded man in the sky kind of visual to that. And they, within their own religion or philosophy or however they interpret it, they recognize that that's a construct for them to allow their human minds to understand it better. But at the same time, what they know and believe Brahman actually is it's this pervading thing that is the space between all physical matter, I guess you could say, to put it into scientific terms. And something about that concept always really struck me from an intellectual perspective, in that I'd never once considered what's in the space between things. Because even in, our physical reality here, there's that bottle sitting on that table, and that bottle is made up of matter that you can break down to the atomic level and subatomic level. But eventually you can only get so small before there's some level of space that we don't understand what's there. Well, is there nothing there? As I think, we kind of think scientifically, or at least in kind of a Western mindset, you just think there's nothing there, or that in space there's nothing. Space is an outer space. There's like nothing there. For light years, there can just be nothing. Their view more is that there is not, like, that space is God, or is Brahman, is what they would call it. And in doing so, Brahman exists within all things, all people, all matter. He is the space that exists between our physical matter. And I know that gets starts twisting your mind in some pretty wild levels, but the way they view it is they almost view it like wind, and that Brahman or God is in constant flux and flowing between all of the space. So like, for example, you and I would share the same, and this, you and I in this bottle and everything around us kind of shares this same continual, pervasive flow of God throughout all, or Brahman as they would call it, throughout all of reality, or all of existence. And that always kind of really triggered my brain, because what I've always felt on a more, I guess, practical level is that this like thing, this passion, this feeling, this idea, this concept, whatever word we want to give it, of the impossible, I felt like this kind of potential that we talk about, this kind of concept, this kind of path, I feel like this is something, particularly the word potential, this is something that exists for everybody. And not that it has to look the exact same path, or it has to be the exact same path for everybody, but I've always felt this kind of universality in this message that we have, and in this idea that you can continually build and create and develop this version of yourself, this person that can go out and do these things and has the capacity for these things that you never dreamed possible. And so this concept of Brahman is one that I've always liked in my mind, in the sense that like, and I think you could easily compare it to like the more Catholic or Westernized view of the Holy Spirit. This kind of pervasive thing that exists in and around all things. And, you know, I think, so it starts getting pretty out there, but I think there almost has to be some level of, I don't know, that connection. I don't know if that's the right word, but there's got to be some level of it gets hard to put words to. There's got to be some level of reality that kind of flows between everyone and allows us to have this same kind of understanding and access to and potential for the world around us, in the sense of what you brought up, how you can take a text or a story or an equation that can be hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of years old and still hold defined relevance and meaning to anyone who knows of it, which is most of the world around us. And so that's always been a very interesting concept to me, is like, you talk about the text in the Bible, for example, or the equation of Einstein, or the story of Romeo and Juliet. That's something that is very all-encompassing to not just society, but most of humanity. And it holds some level of significance and meaning to all of us, and for most of us, it's a pretty similar significance and meaning. And it carries forth these same kind of archetypical meanings behind them. And so you think, well, where does that come from? Like, what is that? And the thing is like, I don't even know that you have to define it so much as recognize that it is there, and that it exists. But hearing you explain a lot of that you explained, really triggered a lot of that memory in my mind. And, you know, there was a whole class almost that we focused on this idea of Brahman. And even by the end of that class, the professor made a point of, even after all of this study and this thought and mostly this discussion, we're still not there in understanding it. He's like, that's kind of the point, is that we're not ever going to be there. It's not something that you ever complete or totally understand, and that's okay. You know, it's kind of at least part of that religion is that the whole process of understanding it is kind of the point. Like that is life, and you can take that construct and spread it out and apply it to so many other things in life. Is like there's so many disciplines or things we chase or passions we pursue where you never get to a point of totally understanding it and knowing it, and that's not really even the purpose behind it. The purpose is simply to go down the path and grow deeper in that understanding, because as you go down that path and grow deeper in that understanding, you kind of do the same thing with your own life. And it almost sounds to me like that's kind of what you're laying out for our own understanding of reality.
Yeah. No, I'd say that's one of the things I would say is, I would actually say it's very similar to what I'm talking about. I would say in a way it's very similar to a number of I would say it's very similar in a way to, if you're willing to expand on it, the Christian interpretation of God, particularly in Genesis 1. And I think there's a difference between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, because Genesis 2 is embodied. He's and there's some symbolic reasons, some symbolic things to take with that, but he's sort of this ethereal figure in the first one. He is whatever it is which separates land from sea, night from day. He's the delineator. Anyway, I've said all that already. In doing what I've done, through sort of tackling this through causation, through metaphysics, through philosophy, the one thing I would say is it only makes God less strange for a short period of time. Because the phrase causal laws exist, it tricks your brain into thinking, well, there you go, you've put it in a nice little package. It's 3 words. I can understand what each of the words mean. There's a period at the end, meaning it's declarative. Good, we're good to go. But then you actually wrestle with what that means for a second. Because in my formulation, here is an English translation of the logical phrase that I proved. Something is, if and only if, there are conditions under which it could be. Actually, it's conditions under which it must be. And those conditions are fulfilled. Now, the conditions are fulfilled part, we can wrap our brains around that, right? That's input, output. Good. But the mediator, that's sticky, right? Because if I'm right, it means that there are immaterial facts of reality which dictate material reality. And that actually, in point of fact, I think if you zoom out at the, as far back as you can allow your imagination to wander. This is why I commented something when you brought up polytheism and then monotheism. We'll get to that in a second. I think this Brahman idea and certain characterizations of the Old Testament of God the Father, I would say specifically, and the causal laws or the logos, I think they're all kind of hinting at really similar things. They're all kind of right there next to each other, and what they are is that the ordering structure of reality, which is the precondition for its existence, And that's why that's a part of the reason. I try not to put God in a box. That's part of the reason that he is omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. That's why he's everywhere and can do everything and sees everything. It's like that. It is this element of reality that is necessarily weaving in and out throughout the whole thing. And without it, reality could not exist. Now, part of the reason for the polytheism comment I made, so you can imagine there's an ordering structure, and one of the features of an ordering structure is that, and they make this known in the Bible in particular, but in all religions they have versions of this, that you can negotiate with the thing. You can negotiate with God. You can offer sacrifices. Now those sacrifices become more abstract as religions tend to go along. I don't make a habit of slaughtering animals anymore. But the idea is still the same, that you can give something up and get something in return. It can be negotiated with. Well, think about the causal relationship that you have with anything that you use. Just looking at that water bottle won't give me a drink of water. I have to expend the time and energy it takes to pick it up, remove the cap, pour it in my mouth, and then I have what I want. Well, of course, there's probably not any gods of water bottles, but there are gods of the sea, gods of war, gods of harvest, gods of fertility. In ancient religions, all of these various figures are gods of wisdom and knowledge. And why might they each have their own domain? Well, they all have their own particular facet of the Logos. They all have their own particular facet of they have their causal laws. If you go out sailing, oblivious to the laws of it, well, bad things are going to happen to you. But in some sense, perhaps, it may have been the case that praying to Poseidon and, might put you in enough of a headspace that you minded your P's and Q's on the open ocean a little more. And the thing is, there is a facet of the Logos in the sea, in war, in knowledge, in love, in everything. There is an order and a causal structure to it. What monotheism figured out was that they all come from the same place, and that is, you can handle all of those facets if you worship the Logos, causation, reality as such. Now, Christianity kind of went, I think, an interesting and correct route. Probably, I'm not offering criticism. That's not the point. I think it's right. It's interesting because they didn't stop at the Logos, because there is God the Father, God the Son, and God, the Holy Spirit, the Trinity. What's interesting about that is, and I think maybe why Christianity got it right, is the Logos is kind of this disembodied, it's just the way things are, the way things work, ordering structure, right? It's a lot of is and not necessarily a lot of ought. Now, a lot of the Old Testament stories try to weave some of that into there, and I would say Genesis 2, with a God with which Adam and Eve walk in the garden, is interesting, because that symbolically, that God is whatever elements of the Logos are particularly pertinent to human beings. And I think that's part of what Christ is symbolically, is I have a tendency to think of the Father as something like the Logos, the ordering structure. The Son, the Holy Spirit is something like consciousness and the voice of conscience. that part of it that inhabits us, that clues us in. And then the Son, and this is, I think I figured out, it's in a sense what it means that Christ was fully human and fully divine, is that he is the perfect union of the two. He is, by definition, what it would mean for a human being with human wants, desires, drives, goals, values, all of that, to perfectly orient himself to the ordering structure of reality, whatever that might mean. But all of that to say, the monotheists figured out that you don't necessarily need to worship all of these individual ones. Subconsciously, there is order, or the orderer as such. And if you can act in accordance with his will, then in all domains, the same sort of thing happens. It's, and that's probably more of a philosophical or a psychological take on it, that's to say nothing of my own personal beliefs. That's sort of not the point, but that's an idea that I've been playing with, is they were able to distill out from all the individual causal relationships the idea of the causal relationship, or the ordered system, the ordering structure as such.
Yeah, I definitely get what you're saying there. And what's wild is these are some pretty high level concepts, and I say that in the sense that you really got to use your brain to kind of think about it and figure it out and follow it. But that's one of the things that I love about it, because again, it's just another area and outlet of where you can really stretch yourself to your limits, and maybe push past them a little bit, just in your own understanding of it.
Yeah.
And what I really love about this discussion is that it's not a discussion of, is this religion right, or is this religion wrong, or is this understanding of the world right, or is this understanding of the world wrong? And it's not a discussion of what is true and what is I'll take that back. It's not a discussion of why is this group right and why is this group wrong, and why, if you view this differently, why should you view it this way instead? I don't think it's so much a discussion of that. It's a discussion that sounds to me like we're asking the question of what is right. And in doing so, you recognize that there is something out there that is true, is something out there that is correct. And you're just going through the process of how do we get closer to that. But at the same time, it's not so much, I kind of think of it like that class we took where we're trying to understand the concept of Brahman. It's not so much that the goal is to actually get to a true and perfect understanding of it. The goal is, moreover, to go throughout the process of working closer toward it. Would that be a correct interpretation?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
And I think I've tried to offer some understanding you know, because I think it might be useful and helpful, but it still eludes me, you know.
Well, and that's the point is, you know, there is understanding. There is increased understanding. I'm going to come away from this conversation, as I have with all of our other conversations, with increased understanding and increased knowledge and increased perspective.
But you're never gonna, there is no getting it.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, there is on some level.
Mm-hmm.
There is, I get this. You know, you have these, but there is no, I've solved the God problem.
Yeah.
Figured
that out, moved on to the next one. You know?
No.
Yeah. But that's what I say is like, that's okay, because that's not the point of it.
Right.
And I think the issue is where we get so tripped up sometimes, and, you know, people get so heated about conversations like this and discussions like this, is because I think we miss that fact. Some people think that is the point, that I'm right, I've got it figured out, and you're wrong, you don't have it figured out. Yeah. And you need to see it the way I see it in order for you to have it figured out. And
right.
Then we can move past it on to the next thing. And it's like, no, that's not the point at all. Like, the point is that we go down this process of trying to understand it.
Yes. I think that's why Peterson's had such an impact.
I agree.
He's not out there necessarily trying to, he says in one of his earliest lectures on the psychological significance of the biblical stories, he said, I'm not trying to tell you what I know for sure to be the case, because there are lots of things I don't know for sure to be the case. And he still is very much that way. He's trying to take you on an explorative journey with him. That's what he's trying to do. He'll chime in as a psychologist when it's necessary. There are things that he is, you know, familiar with, but he's not trying to beat you over the head with anything. He's inviting you along on the journey, and that seems to be very effective, and it's very welcoming and engaging, and you want to be a part of it. And I think, to your point, I try to do that. You know, I still have opinions and things I think, and the way I look at a thing at the time, but overwhelmingly, I would just as soon have engaging, interesting, shifting conversations. I would like to be right. We all would, but that's not necessarily what I'm after. It's the digging. Yeah. I like the digging.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we do on this show, and with our message, our mission, our vision. If you guys are kind of sitting there wondering, like, well, what do I do with all of this? Where do I go with all of this? How do I take this and move forward in my own passions, my own purpose in life? I think a lot of it is this discussion in and of itself. You guys have always heard us say, and I think some people who get exposed to our message and don't always go deep enough with it, I think some people actually misinterpret this, and I have to explain this to people sometimes. Our slogan, our E equals MC squared, for lack of a better term, the piece that we want people to walk away with and use these two words to understand everything that we talk about, and know that these two words have all of that meaning behind them, to where when two people who understand these words say these words, they know it is a symbolic representation of this massive grouping of information and insight and knowledge and emotion and spirit and mentality. Those two words are be impossible. It's not the part where we say do the impossible. It's the be impossible. That has always been the core, like filtered down purpose of everything we say.
It's your nugget.
Yeah. And it's be impossible because that is the process. And we've talked about this a lot before, but that is the whole point of everything we talk about. The point is not to go out and do the impossible. Yes, that is what we all want. Like you say, like you want to be right, but that's not the point of it. Like, you want to have those moments where you do something impossible, because those are gratifying to the soul. Those are little nuggets that you get that keep you moving forward. That's the part that gives some of the human attachment and the human drive toward it. But the point itself is actually to be impossible, to be in a continuous state of building that person that is capable of doing things you never dreamed possible. And I think you can extrapolate that into saying, you know, from for the purposes of this context, you want to be in continual search of better understanding the world and the reality around you. But also you want to be in continual search of understanding what exists in the spaces between. And that's important, because that space in between, the contrast of that, gives you understanding, a better understanding of actually what is. And I think that for us, and, you know, for what we talk about on this show, this discussion is a perfect representation that the be impossible is where we grow. The be impossible is the point of what we're doing. That is where we're all trying. That's when we wake up every single day. That's the mission and the goal we have set out before us. That is the point. And that's something that we can continually work toward and never, ever actually perfectly attain, yet we will live a better life for having pursued it each day and each week and each year and each lifetime. So that's why I think this message and this process and these kind of discussions that we have always been so unbelievably like fascinating and intriguing to me, is because it's just that representation. It's a thing that, like, it's not even a representation. It's another way of approaching the exact same thing of this, like, these areas where the pursuit is in the process itself, and the point is in the pursuit, not in the ultimate destination.
Yeah.
And so I guess along with that, and kind of in closing here, because I know we're starting to run out of time for today's purposes, but maybe we'll have to come back and do a part 4 at that point.
But always down with that.
To me, I would say that, you know, in this whole process and kind of a physical representation of not just everything we've talked about today, but the past several years' journey of your life, and several years' journey along these episodes, is you bring up Dr. Peterson. And I know he's been an extremely influential person in your life, and somebody that kind of got you down this line of, or helped you pursue this line of thinking even further. Recently, you got to see him in lecture for his new book, which is called We Who Wrestle with God, which I think it's a whole separate discussion, but I love the title because that's kind of what discussions like these are. It's kind of wrestling with these ideas, because they're not easy and they're not supposed to be. And, you know, they're really, wrestling is really a process. It's not something that you ever are designed to complete or finish. But recently you got to see one of those lectures and be a part of one of those lectures. And at the end of it, you got to meet him again and give him a copy of this thesis.
I did.
That is the most important idea you have in this lifetime. This it's a physical manifestation of that. And it's also one of these little nuggets, one of these kind of full circle moments where it's not the end for you, but it is one of these points along this journey of understanding where you can say, like there's something I did along the way. What was that like, and what did that mean to you, both in the moment and maybe more especially going forward in this pursuit?
Well, for starters, it was a really long 10 days. I'd had the idea to give him a copy for a while. So my fiance Taylor, she got me a spectacular ticket, like basically middle of the second row. An amazing ticket. It was the best Christmas gifts I've ever gotten. And I'd had the idea to present him with a copy of the thesis because the first time we met, I told him I was going to study philosophy at OU. I was going to study for a master's degree when I met him in Akron. You were
we were there for it. Yeah.
And you and Austin both were there, wasn't it? Or was it you and JD?
It was me and Austin.
Yeah. You guys were both there.
Because he had just started chemo into his very first battle with Hodgkin lymphoma, his very first battle with cancer.
Yeah. So we were all there, and I told him that I was going to go get this master's. And he said, and he seemed quite pleased with that. Now, that never really left me. Well, you fast forward some years, and I've completed the process. And so I told him that in spring of 22, and then March 10th, 2025 rolls around, and I've been completed with the master's for about 6 months. And I'd had the idea to give him a copy of the thesis, and again, my high trade openness and my capacity to generate ideas kicked in, and about 10 or 11 days before this lecture in Evansville, Indiana, I get the bright idea, I bet somebody has posted a DIY bookbinding video on YouTube. And they have, and they've posted lots of them. And it turns out it's kind of a thriving little hobby. And it's a wonderful, wonderful process. But it's hell to go through, and to get that crash course in 10 days is brutal. Because I basically, for the first 3 days, I was looking around ordering things and trying to get really fast shipping from Amazon and getting this in, getting that in, and learning, how to do it and how to get the right paper. And there's this thing called the grain direction on paper, which I didn't even know existed. Well, I know that's a thing now. And how to fold the pamphlets and then sew the pamphlets together into the text block, and then what kind of glue you need. And Dad made me a very good little makeshift book press out of a couple pieces of boards and some wing nuts to tighten them down on. And, what font I wanted it in. And I had to reformat it, because what you do is you cut 11 by 17 paper down to 8.5 by 11 to get the right grain direction, and then you print that in book fold in Word front and back, and you get it formatted, and you fold those together. And so it's this long drawn out process, and I botched the first text block that I put together, and I leather bound it. So I had to learn how to, what measurements I needed for the book board and what kind of book board I needed, and how to glue, I had to get the right thickness of leather. Ultimately, the one flaw that came together in this project was I tried very hard to get some better looking version of the title on the cover. I had considered stamping it and then painting the stamps, like leather stamping it into there, and then painting it in with gold paint. In principle, an idea might have worked with a little larger lettering where I stamped it, then painted the letters with foil adhesive, and then pressed the foil into it. Traditionally, it's done with hot stamps and gold foil. This little heated pen called a foil quill might have worked. It just ran out of time. I glued the text block into the cover the morning before the show.
Oh, man.
And we scrambled for ideas and just couldn't get it. And so it's in my handwriting in gold Sharpie on the cover. But what I wound up with was actually, all things considered, for a first attempt at bookbinding, a kind of cute little leather-bound edition of my thesis. And it looked like a book. You know, it looked like it got put together.
I didn't realize until just now that you actually bound that yourself.
Yeah, I bound
it. That's how much it looked like a book. I was like, because you sent me pictures of it a few weeks back, and I was like, oh man, that's so cool. Like he got a custom printed copy of his book made somewhere.
It is custom printed, and I did it. Yeah.
It's 100% custom. That's incredible.
Nice, paper, arguably too thick. I wound up going with 80 pounds. 70 would have been better, but I did kind of like how the extra thickness filled it out a little bit because it is just a thesis. So the extra little thickness, actually, it helped. It helped. But it wound up, it looked pretty good. It worked great, and I was pleased. And it's, I've got reasonable cursive handwriting, so it's, it's a nice little touch, I guess. So I've got a bound, hardback, leather-bound copy of my thesis, done to the best of my ability. And it's one of the few things in my life I can really say that about. I just ran out of time, but I gave it what I had to give. I learned how to unbound a book in 10 days. So anyway, I wrote a little note on the inside and told him a little bit about what it was, and left some contact information in there because you never know unless you try. And then the Q&A, or the meet and greet comes up, and of course I'm shaking like a leaf. Buck fever worse than just about any batch I ever had of it. Just so excited and so happy. And I give it to him. I walk up to him. And first and foremost, something you need to know about Dr. Peterson, about Jordan, is...
I know exactly what you're going to say.
He is so gracious.
Yeah.
He is so... I watched him shake hands and take pictures with probably 100 people that night, or something to that effect. And he looked like he meant it in every single one of them. And you feel that way when you talk to him. And so... And I don't think you can fake that. I don't.
You can probably fake it for the first 10.
Yeah.
But not after hundreds of thousands like he's done. Because that's something that Austin and I still remember from when we met him, is when you're with him for however long that period might be, it feels as if no one else and nothing else in the world exists.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty powerful thing to be able to give.
Oh, God.
Hundreds of people in a row each night.
And I walked up to him, and he had this almost quizzical look on his face. Just seemed a little puzzled, like he recognized me, because, I don't know, maybe he did. It wouldn't be impossible. It'd be a bit strange as many people as he talked to, but he just looked at... I felt like he looked at me like he just like 10% recognized who it was. And I told him, I said, we met 3 years ago in Akron, and I told you I was going to study philosophy at OU. I've bound my thesis for you. I would really, really like you to have it, and it would mean the world to me if you would read it. And he was very gracious and accepted it. And initially, he had handed it to someone who was going to... There was just over, about in this direction, there was the chair and the table that he was going to sit at for the VIP Q&A. Initially, it got set on that, and then he asked me if I would like it in the picture, in the meet and greet picture. I said, yeah, I'd love that. So it was his idea, and they bring it back up, and he asked me what discipline it was in or what field it was in. I told him it was a piece of metaphysics, and I was just, I was trying so, I would like to say I was trying so hard not to trip over myself, but I just, there's a certain level of excited that I am incapable of doing anything about.
Yeah.
And I was just, I shook it, and I was smiling and just having a wonderful time. And he said, well, congratulations on your degree. And I said, thank you. I probably said thank you 100 times. I told him, I said, I don't think you really understand what this means to me. Thank you. And he thanked me, and so he was phenomenal, and he congratulated me on the degree, and I walked off, and The book did get set on the table, and then I watched him pick it up and walk off stage with it when the show was over. And in the moment, it was just an incredible high of the greatest variety. I mean, I was so happy because I told Tay, similar to what I just told you about the actual making of the thing. It's a short list of things in my life that I really pushed as hard as I could, and in which I could make a reasonable case that there wasn't much more I could have done about it. Like, I really just put it out there, you know. The message I left in there, part of it was I would meet him anytime, any place to talk about this. And I'd actually tweeted that a few times. I went through a little stretch there where I thought maybe it would be a good idea to find his, like, when a new tweet came up, get it in the comments section and see if I could make it stick. And because that's really actually all I want out of this. But the closest I could get to all I want that I have any control over was I need to get these ideas in front of him. And I did that with a lot of help. In addition to, I mean, she bought the ticket, but also she was a tremendous support during the making of the book, helped me with trying to do the cover and get things figured out with that. I can't say enough about Tay and what an amazing help she was. But in the simple sense of the phrase, I did it. Like, we did it, whatever. It's in front of him. There is one bound copy of my thesis on this planet. And Jordan Peterson has it. And I told him that I study metaphysics. Like, that's it. And so there's this interesting peace and satisfaction with it because, of course, there's some more I would like out of the situation. I check my email every day, hoping. But as far as anything I could do, there's this tremendous joy and peace and satisfaction in what I've done. And that I knew that was one of my best pieces of work. I knew it's one of my most important pieces of work. I put a lot of effort into the time I had to get it put into a presentable package. And I got it to the man that it needed to go to. And I'm okay with whatever happens next, even if it's nothing. Because it's done. I've done my part. And then the rest is out of my hands. And I'm okay with that. And it's just a surreal, wonderful experience.
I feel like I understand perfectly all of the emotions and everything you just described there, obviously under very different context. But I don't think that the context matters so much, because it's what you just laid out there is a perfect representation and embodiment of everything we stand for with Impossible Performance and everything we discuss on this show. What you laid out just there is what we would call the impossible. And specifically that whole journey from whenever the first thought, or maybe even the first time you heard Dr. Peterson, or the first time you ever thought to consider pursuing philosophy in any
probably 2016
major,
or 2017.
Yeah. So before anything we did even existed, from that moment through the moment, and I'm going to use the moment that you saw him walk off stage with your book in hand, because that to me was the most powerful moment of that whole story you just laid out. and then continuing on even further in your life beyond there, because I know you will continue on even further. But that whole story is the process of being impossible. And when you think about the arc of that storyline and how it will continue, the great thing about an arc is that an arc begins and it ends, but it inherently implies that there was something before its beginning and will be something after its ending, because it's implied that it will go on to complete a full circle. The great thing about that lays out perfectly what being impossible is, because whoever you were in 2016 when you first had that inclination, or whoever you were the first time along that journey that you ever heard Dr. Peterson, you would have never guessed or dreamed that you would someday be handing him a hand-bound copy, a book of your thesis, and that you would get to witness it becoming literally a part of his journey. And that's truly something impossible in the very best of ways. But another piece along that I think is so perfect, not only for today's discussion, but for the purposes of this story, is the fact that you mentioned there was what you called the only flaw of the project or the book. Yeah. And that's that you never felt like you got the printed title 100% perfect. I actually think that makes it even better, because it represents what we've talked about today, in that the point is never actually to make it 100% complete, or to get to a point where it's 100% finished or done or totally understood, depending on what context we're talking about. It goes perfectly in line with the point was the process of doing it. And then you take that even further to where you're able to give that to him. It's part of the picture. It's that ultimate moment of, this whole process coming to fruition. But what's great about it is that the last memory you have is not giving him the book. It's watching him walk off stage with it. Yeah. And I think that's so important, because what's great about it is it's actually a physical, literal, as well as figurative memory that you will have of watching him walk forward in his journey with your book, your idea, the most important thing you've ever done, continue on with him as part of his journey. Yeah. And that's something you can't, we can always try to put words to it, but you can't fully put words to it. It's something that can only be understood, and it can only be understood by experiencing something like that for yourself. Yeah. And I've experienced something like that for myself. And so I'm starting to fidget a lot, because I fidget when I get really excited. And it's because you explained that feeling of waiting in line. And I started feeling that feeling when you described it, because I've felt that to that level before. And I could see it in that look in your eye. And there's just not ways to ever fully explain or comprehend that until you're there. But when you are, it's something that will stick with you for the rest of your existence. Yeah. And I'm just so happy and so thankful and so excited that you had that moment.
Well, thank you.
And that you have that moment continuing forward. Yeah. Because, like you say, you certainly hope he'll email you up one day and want to chat about it more. But what I love that you said at the end is that going forward, it doesn't, like, you honestly will be just as happy if you never hear a word of it again. Because, as we've talked about the entire day, the whole purpose of that arc and that journey was the pursuit of it and the man it's built today. And now you can take that moment as a driving and guiding force going forward to whatever lies next on the journey.
Yeah.
And that is a literal example of facing the impossible, being impossible, and in this case, ultimately doing something impossible along the way. So that's just, man, it's awesome to hear that. Awesome to have had this conversation with you, and we're going to have to bring you back for a part 4.
Yeah.
And actually what I think I'd like to do is I'd like for you to send me the link of that personality test you took.
Oh yeah.
I'd like to take it myself, and then you can come on here and explain to everybody what's wrong with me.
Oh no. You don't want me to do that. It was all I could do to understand me.
Yeah. We can at least have some discussions.
I'm not in the
about
business
everything.
of interpreting other people.
Well, I'd love for us to have some discussions about it, because it's totally fascinating.
It's cool.
That kind of stuff.
It's clued me into a few little things about myself.
For sure.
Well worth doing.
And it'll help you catch things too. I'm sure that when you start thinking a certain way about something, or you notice yourself start doing something in a particular way, I'm sure it helps you like recognize like, oh, this is that part of me.
Yeah.
And maybe I want to fuel that part of me, or maybe I need
rein
that back a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that kind of stuff is always helpful. But man, I appreciate you coming on today. I'm going to wrap things up quickly so you can get to your tea time here. But guys, as we talk about this has ended up being an incredible, one of the most powerful episodes we've done in a while, particularly for the entire discussion and what that discussion represented. And then the example we got to lay out for you at the end of what Logan has recently gotten to experience and will have for the rest of his life carrying forward. This is the impossible. This is being impossible. And like I say, in this case, this is doing the impossible. And while, it wasn't because of our message that Logan had this experience, it is a perfect representation of it. And that's where we say we see this message in so many areas, even beyond just what we've been fortunate enough to help drive in our own promotion and message and spreading of this mission and vision that we have. We've been so fortunate for it just to get to observe it, even in outside circumstances. And the reason is because we know, because we've seen it within ourselves, we know that this potential exists in everyone. Even in areas that may not be influenced by where we can reach currently, even in areas beyond places we'll ever get to. We know that this exists in everyone. And that is why it is our mission and our vision, which we read at the beginning and end of every episode, to help spread this message and this mindset as far as humanly possible, because we want to help bring as many stories as humanly possible of exactly that perfect scenario of the impossible. And whether we ever influence them or not, it doesn't matter to us, because at the end of the day, we are in that process. We are in that pursuit. We want to hear more stories, and we want to know of more stories, and we want to find more stories, as many as is possible, of just what Logan has laid out here. And we hope that each of you listening, if you haven't already, we hope that you will have one of those experiences of the impossible in your own life, in your own pursuits, in your own passions of whatever you're chasing in life. And so if this episode has helped you have further fire or passion or yearning for whatever it is you're chasing in life, as we know it has, please share it with someone that you think it would positively impact. Because at the end of the day, that is how we achieve everything we're chasing at Impossible Performance, in our vision of creating a global culture of strength, fostering a spirit of growth in constant pursuit of the impossible. Logan, if people want to find you online or hear more about what you're doing, or even read some of the things you're putting out now, where can they reach you?
Easiest way to do that is, so there's a couple things. I've got a Substack now that has a link to the Thesis on it. It's just
which you should all go subscribe to. I am personally subscribed myself. I know Austin is subscribed to it, and you guys should go check it out because there's some incredible, thought-provoking, really some topics on there that really push you to your limits mentally and in other domains as well. And it's a great place to help learn and grow in your own pursuit.
We're going to start filling that out soon. I got the Thesis up on it. You can find me on Instagram at logan.reynolds27. You can find me on YouTube, although that's mostly music stuff at the moment. We're in the process of figuring out how to do this, some of my intellectual work a little bit more publicly, but those are all good places where you can find me and where I'll be talking about anything that I'll be doing. And if I may make one little quick case here, Tay's dad, his house burnt down a couple of days ago. There is going to be a benefit for him at Casey's Bar in Parkersburg, West Virginia. So if you're local or semi-local and you're listening to this and you'd like to come out, by all means, you don't have to come, but I'm putting a little plug out there. If anybody wants to come, help try and raise a little money for a good cause, trying to get Steve's home taken care of, that'd be wonderful. It'd be great to see some people there, whether it's people that have known me from the music side or people that know me from this side. Either way, it'd be real good to see you, and it'd be going to a good cause. So April 5th at Casey's Bar in Parkersburg, you should be able to find out some more information there.
Absolutely. I'm glad you put that on there. Send us the links and everything for it, or all the details, and we'll put it on. We'll put in the show notes and all the posts we make in relation to this episode, and we'll try to get as many people out there as humanly possible. I didn't know the date till just now, but we've actually conveniently got a lot of people coming into town for that weekend. So we'll see what we can do to make some good things happen. So. Yeah. All right, man. Well, hey, I appreciate it as always. Appreciate you guys listening, and I'm really excited to hear about everything you guys have gained from having listened to this episode. So thank you guys for doing everything you do. Thank you for helping us spread this mission and this vision at Impossible Performance. And as always, thank you for listening, and be impossible. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.